Welcome to Forbidden Records, where we dive headfirst into the strange, the unexplained, and the terrifying truth. I'm Ansel, and today we're talking about a story that's not just about death in snow. It's about fear, panic, and a mystery that even after 60 years refuses to be melted away. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. So let's begin with who they were. In 1959, 9 Soviet hikers set out into the Ural Mountains. However, they never came back. 8 young students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, which is now known as the Ural Federal University, all experienced hikers, all friends. The group originally started off as a group of 10, but one of them left the expedition early on the 28th of January due to knee and joint pains due to his health issues, and was the sole survivor of the original expedition team. Igor Dyatlov, 23, the leader, is described to be charismatic, organized, and trusted. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, was described to be strong and impulsive. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20, described to be fiery and determined, was one of the 2 females that were on this expedition team. Zenaida Komogorova, 22, was described as sociable and resilient, and was the other female in the expedition team. Rastim Slobodin, 23, was described as athletic and intelligent. Yuri Krinonishchenko, 23, described to be the joker of the group. Nikolai Tabuks Brigno, 23, was the quiet thinker. Alexander Kolevatov was described to be technical and serious. And lastly, Semyon Zolotaryov, 38, the mystery man, which we will talk more about in later part of this episode, was an older former soldier who joined the expedition team in the last minute. Now the group was headed to Thornton Mountain, whose name in the Mansi language means don't go there. However, they never made it. The group left on January 27, 1959. The goal was to complete a 350-kilometer ski trip and gain their Grade 3 hiking certificate, which was known to be the highest available at the time. The last known photo shows the group still smiling and joking at the train station on the 25th of January, oblivious to what was to follow. On January 31st, the group arrived at the edge of a highland area and began to prepare for the climb. In a wooded valley, they cached surplus foods and equipment that would be used for the trip back. The next day, the hikers started to move through the pass. It seems they planned to get over the pass and make camp for the next night on the opposite side, but because of the worsening of weather conditions, like snowstorms and the decreasing visibility, they lost their direction and deviated south towards the top of Kholat Shakil. When they realized their mistake, the group decided to set up camp there on the slope of the mountain rather than move 1.5 kilometers downhill to a forested area that would have offered some shelter from the weather. And on February 12, when Dyatlov's promised telegram never arrived, families became worried. This led to a search which was launched on February 20th, and after searching for 6 days, on February 26th, a rescue team finally found their tent, still pitched to the slope of Kholat Shakil, a mountain whose name means dead mountain. And that was when the nightmare officially began, was when their bodies were found, half naked, mutilated, scattered across a frozen wasteland. Questions began that never been fully answered. So their tents were found cut open from the inside, their boots, jackets, food, all untouched, and footprints leading away from the tent, some in socks, some barefoot, and one wearing only a single shoe. Camera footage and diary entries were found around the final campsite of the group. These entries and footage allowed for investigations to follow the group's route up to the day of the proceeding of the incident. So why did they flee into the negative 25 degrees Celsius weather with barely any clothes when they had left all of them behind in a tent? Above 1.5 kilometers down the slope, near a forest edge, the first bodies were found. Krivonishchenko and Doroshenko, both found in their underwear with a small fire lit in what was assumed to be an attempt to keep themselves warm from the harsh temperatures. Nearby, Zenaida, Dyatlov, and Rastim were found in positions suggesting that they were crawling back to towards the tents. But the worst has yet to come. Because 2 months later, in May, the remaining 4 bodies were discovered in a ravine under deep snow in tragic and horrifying states. Dubinina's tongue was missing, her eyes were gone, and ribs were shattered. Zolotaryov had suffered a massive chest trauma. Tabuk's Brignol had a skull fracture, and Kolevatov had strange burn marks and soft tissues missing. The injuries were excessive, to say the least. Pathologists who assessed the 4 bodies found in May shifted the narrative of the incident. 3 of the hikers had fatal injuries. Nikolai Vladimirovich had major skull damage, and Dubinina and Zolotaryov had major chest fracture. Notably, the bodies had no external wounds associated with the bone fractures, as if they had been subjected to a high level of pressure equivalent to the force of a car crash, but no external bruising, no injuries that might have led to their death, and it was concluded that they had all died of hypothermia. Slobodin had a small crack in his skull, but it was not thought to be a fatal wound. The other 4 bodies found at the bottom of the creek in a running stream of water had soft tissue damage to their heads and face. For example, Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, and part of the lips, as well as facial tissues and a fragment of skull bone, while Zolotaryov had his eyeballs missing, and Alexander Kolevatov had his eyebrows missing. Some bodies also had orange skin, gray hair, and high radiation on their clothes, which were things that raised more questions than answers. There were also bizarre details, like Dubinina's tongue that seems to have been ripped out while she was still alive. Clothing had traces of radioactivity. Some bodies showed signs of violent struggles, and many had burns, yet no fire that was large enough to cause them. None of it made any sense, and the official cause of death, a compelling natural force. So let's go through the main theories, some rational and others not so much, about the mysterious case and death of these 9 hikers. The first official theory is an avalanche. A block of snow or a slab detached from the slope and struck the tent, prompting the hikers to flee into the night. Running simulations inspired by Disney's Frozen held that it was a plausible cause. However, there was no clear signs of an avalanche. The slope angle was too shallow for an avalanche to even happen, and the tents were still standing, and the injuries found on the bodies did not match those of victims of an avalanche. The second theory was a catabanic winds. The catabanic winds are rare, violent winds that could mimic the forces of an avalanche. And with the circumstances that it would cause, it is possible for hypothermia to occur, as well as panic. But no signs of any physical wind damage were found at the scene. Now, the third theory was an infrasound. Low-frequency sound waves could be created from the wind blowing through the mountains, and those sound waves might cause panic, anxiety, and even hallucinations. And with them being in a group, a shared hallucination could explain the panic and irrational behaviors that they displayed, and even them cutting their way out of the tent. Though this theory does seem fascinating, but it still wouldn't explain the injuries found on the victims' bodies. Now, the fourth theory was that there was military involvement. Now, the area that the group was near was in close proximity to a Soviet testing zone. Now, some suggest that parachute mines, secret military weapons, or even top-secret radioactive contaminations or chemical warfare. Why this theory would gain more traction was due to the strange lights that hikers roughly 50 kilometers away reported seeing in the sky, and the official reports of this accident had censorships that was also closed faster than it was supposed to be, as if there was some form of cover-up or something that they were trying to hide or avoid being discovered by the investigations. Now, the fifth theory is a Yeti, or an animal attack. Now, this theory was popularized by media, internet, and even the Discovery Channel. It was probably fueled by the deep footprints found in the snow on the scene, as well as the missing body parts from some of the bodies. However, there were no animal tracks found at the scene, and wounds would not match the victims of an animal attack. There were no bite marks, there were no slash marks from claws. So it's a theory that's interesting to listen to, but not very backed by what was found at the scene. Now, the sixth theory is a paradoxical undressing. Now, this theory is plausible because victims of hypothermia suffer from a common condition called a paradoxical undressing, where they start to feel hot due to their body trying to generate heat to keep them warm. and they start stripping off their clothes. Now, this theory would explain the bizarre factor that the victims were found partially nude, but it does not explain the internal trauma or the missing body parts. Now, the last theory, of course, like a lot of the other cases we've talked about so far on this channel, would be aliens or supernatural. Now, this compelling theory is for sci-fi fans, though it's thin on proof, but it would explain the lights in the sky that some of the hikers reported seeing, and the theory of the radiations and mutilations of the bodies. Now, some believers believe that this was an abduction or an attack from the extraterrestrials or the supernaturals. Though it was thin on proof, it would explain all the cover-ups, the bizarre situations, and the unexplainability around this entire case. Now, remember the mystery man from earlier, Semyon Zolotaryov? Now let's talk about him, the oldest hiker. He joined last minute. He was a World War II veteran with mysterious tattoos and a camera that was not logged in the official gear. Now in 2018, his grave was actually exhumed, and DNA tests revealed that the remains that were buried in the grave were actually not his. So who was this guy? Why was he with the expedition team? And how did he even meet them in the first place? They were a group of students, graduates. And this guy was a war veteran. There were speculations on whether he was a KGB agent or a spy, but no one really knows the truth behind it. So now let's talk about some of the cover-ups. See, investigators were told to wrap up this case very quickly. The case files were sealed until the 1990s, and photos and documents were missing or even edited. And one of the last entries in the hikers' journals actually read, "We now know that snowmen exist." Now, some claim that, it could have been a joke, but others aren't so sure. Perhaps they saw something that the government did not want people finding out. Now we look at modern investigations. Right, in 2020, the Russian government reopened the case and settled on a slab avalanche as the official theory and official cause of this incident. In 2021, scientists used models from Disney's Frozen to simulate snow behavior and supported this avalanche theory, which in my opinion seems ridiculous. Like, you're using a Disney movie, like an animated Disney movie, as substantial backing for a theory that didn't even make sense in the beginning. Like, it doesn't explain all the injuries and everything, and all the tents were still pitched. So it seems like a really weak backing to this, and it seems like it adds to the suspiciousness of this entire case. And many experts and relatives of the hikers also disagree to these. There were too many holes, and there were too many missing answers. So the Dyatlov hikers went into the mountains with a love for nature, friendship, and adventure. Something out there, something powerful, mysterious, or human, ended their journey in terror. Now, we may never know the truth, but every year they'll return to Dyatlov Pass, some to pay respects and tribute, others to seek answers. But all who go come back changed. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Forbidden Records. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe if you have not subscribed. I would be really, really grateful. And let me know if you have a mystery of this world or a topic you would like me to talk about in the future. And leave those in the comments down below as well, and I might dive into that in the future episode. But until then, stay curious, stay warm. See ya!